Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is James Wyatt, the General Manager of aeroconcept, and on behalf of WePlan and aeroconcept, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on next generation workforce planning in cargo and ground handling. Apologies for starting a couple of minutes late, but happy to see that we are now up and running, and great to see so many of you here online. Throughout the year, WePlan hosts webinars highlighting different topics and insights around workforce management. Today's webinar is the second session in the series, focusing on today's challenges in cargo and ground handling in relation to workforce planning. The purpose of the webinars is to bring together expert panels to offer different perspectives on current practices, on current topics and best practices in workforce planning. And we want to give you the insights you need to future-proof your workforce management. A short introduction into WePlan and aeroconcept. WePlan is a startup that has developed a manpower planning solution for long-term planning of personnel and resources. WePlan features functionalities such as demand forecasting, scenario planning, optimization, and duty plan analytics. After having developed a solution for aircrew planning, WePlan launched modules for ground and cargo staff planning just last year. And that's a nice introduction then into aeroconcept. We were very proud to partner together with WePlan back in 2021 to support the implementation of cargo and ground handling initiatives within this very, very important sector. Aeroconcept is an independent aviation consulting company based in Germany, focused on the cargo and logistics side of this fascinating industry. We have some very, very interesting topics today, and we have some very, very interesting speakers. We're going to be hearing three different presentations from Glen, from Franziska Burmester, and from David Preuss, all with different angles and views when it comes to workforce planning within the industry. Some very exciting insights, and then we'll be having some further discussions after that in an open forum. And this is where we'd like to have your inputs as the audience. Your inputs are very important for us as a panel. We'd love to have your questions. Feel free to ask us anything, and I will ensure as the moderator that the panel does their very best to answer those questions for you. And please try to make them as difficult as you can, and let's have some fun with it. So just a quick introduction then to our speakers. We're first going to be hearing from Glen. And Glen is the Vice President of Cargo at Menzies Aviation. And in his current role, he is the owner of Menzies Global Cargo Product, in which he aligns cargo activities around the world. Alan joined Menzies Aviation in January 18 as Head of Operational Learning, and previously spent 22 years with Cathay Pacific Airways based in Hong Kong, where his latest position was that of General Manager Cargo Services. In this role, he directed policy and procedure and was responsible for the safety and security of the worldwide cargo operations of Cathay Pacific in both the Hong Kong hub and at approximately 100 overseas locations. Having started his career in the Royal Air Force in 1984 as an aircraft engineer, Alan also has a strong background in training, having spent most of his career in delivering and managing the provision of safety and technical training to both flight and cabin crew, as well as aircraft engineers. Alan, welcome to the session. Really happy to have you.
Thanks, James. Let me just now work out whether with that CV I can actually work the presentation system. But thank you. It's really pleasure to be here today. I've had lots of really good discussions with the team at WePlan about cargo issues around planning, etc. So it's really nice to have this opportunity today to discuss it with a broader audience. So I'm just waiting for my slides to appear on the screen.
Well, Alan, while you do that, just let me quickly introduce the other speakers, and then I'll introduce you then directly to your presentation, if that's okay. So our second speaker following Alan is going to be Franziska Burmester. Hi, Francie. Good afternoon. Franziska is the co-founder of WePlan. And before founding WePlan, Franziska gained broad experience as a consultant in the aviation industry, where she supported clients in improving workforce productivity and digitalizing their planning process for more than 8 years. During this time, she worked with airlines, airports, and ground handlers around the globe and identified the need of a proper system to forecast resource demand based on operational processes, especially nowadays where volatility has increased extremely, something which we'll be looking at during the course of this afternoon session. 2 years ago, WePlan started to roll out its solutions for the cargo and ground handling industry. And during this time, Franziska has also worked closely with Menzies to integrate the IATA handling processes into the WePlan solution. Welcome, Franziska.
Thank you, James, also for taking over the moderation.
Well, let's see if you thank me at the end. And finally, we will be hearing from David Preuss. David is currently the Chief Information Officer for Cologne Bonn Airport. David has extensive experience in multinational environments where managing complex business requirements as well as cultural diversity is key to success. Having worked in the same role in other industries across the globe, David is a strong people believer and favors contribution over convention. Accepting risk to a certain degree and balancing it with speed is one of the key principles in his professional career. And describing himself as an empathetic techie who loves to team up, the latest project that he is working on is the implementation of the largest private 5G infrastructure deployed in Europe on the campus of Cologne Bonn Airport. Good afternoon, David, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction, James, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Perhaps we can discuss about the impact of 5G on aircraft performance later on. Okay, excellent. So here we are. So we're going to be hearing from our three speakers in the order that we've just introduced them. So firstly, Alan, and then Franziska, and then David. Please feel free to ask us questions at any time. Drop them into the chat, and we'll come to those during our Q&A session following the presentations. So if all the technicalities are working, I'm going to hand over to Alan. Alan's going to give us an insight into the air cargo business of Menzies Aviation today. He's going to be looking at the associated KPIs, the tons per full-time employee calculations, and how resource planning is affected by these parameters. Alan, the virtual stage is all yours.
So thank you again. As mentioned in James's introduction, rather lengthy introduction, I think that probably goes with my age. I get a long introduction. But I'm very happy to be here to support WePlan in this seminar. Menzies is a Scottish business. It's been around since 1833. So that's not 6:30 last night. It's since 1833, the year. So we're nearly 200-year-old business who really started off in logistics, started off involved with railways and newspapers, is kind of where we started from a long time ago. And we've evolved into an aviation services business, particularly over the last 15, 20 years. That's been our focus until probably about 4 years ago, we became exclusively an aviation services business, based still in Scotland. So Menzies at a glance for us, we have 4 real business areas that we really focus on. So we have air cargo services, which is the area which I'm involved in. Ground services, which is ground handling. If you go to a lot of airports around the world, you'll see lots of Menzies labeled ground handling equipment. We have a big fueling service as well. And we have a lot of other services that we do in there, including lounges, meet and greets, wheelchair services around the world. But Menzies being an old business, and again, that tagline of people, passion and pride, it's really important because we do talk about all the time that it's all about the people. And this manpower area very much touches on that. So it can seem a little bit like just a business problem, but there's a people side to the whole issue of how we manage people's time, how we make it engaging, how we make sure we get the right people in the right place. So with our background in logistics and being involved in aviation since '93, and really being 100% aviation services now, We really are very much involved in the people game. So a lot of the information I'm going to show you is all information that's in the public domain. Menzies is a publicly listed company. So we're listed on the UK Stock Exchange. So we're a fairly big business. This is 2021, so still in the pandemic. Our number of aircraft tons was about 614,000 last year. We did about 1.7 million tons of cargo. Those aircraft tons was significantly less than 2019, of course, for all the things that were happening. But our cargo tonnage actually grew last year. So cargo has become a much bigger focus for Menzies over the last 4 years, and we've been moving forward. We've done 27 billion litres of fueling. We're in 38 countries, 212 stations. And when we published our annual report last year, we had 29,000 staff. So that was basically when we did our results, or when the report was being published, 29,000. That's already 33,000 staff that's in Menzies today. So it's coming back very quickly, and we're now pretty much the size that we were pre-pandemic, but with a lot of different issues, because I think for anybody that's flown lately, things ain't what they used to be. It is a very different world as we're moving forward into this as well. So Menzies is a global organization. We're in every part of the world. People are pretty much people wherever you are, but some of the issues with getting people to work, employing people, etc., do change from area to area. I'm going to start focusing really on our cargo business as such, and as I mentioned, is our cargo business back in 2018 when we had a refocus on the cargo business. We've grown since then to 57 stations at the moment. I have several already in the fire for this year, so we'll be adding to that number for this year. So we're very, very keen on growing our cargo business, and so bringing in onboarding staff and getting them in the right place with the right skill set all the time is really a big part of our business. It's not IT systems, it's not manuals. It's really about people and getting them into the correct place. So again, I'm going to show you a few of the stats that actually came out of our annual report, just to give you a flavor of what a challenge this is in the ground handling space. So looking at the challenges, this is from our annual report. It's in public consumption. So right at the top of our risk ladder that when we speak to our shareholders is all about people. So our people, the risk is recruiting, getting talent, retaining staff. And I'm going to give you some numbers in just a moment of what that actually looks like. It's quite significant. So we're seeing in all factors of life, there's a real challenge in getting talent into businesses. So filling vacant roles, keeping the staff that we've actually got through difficult times, managing demographic changes, managing expectations of staff and what they're actually wanting to do as well. And all of that in a challenging global market with inflationary pressures, a start-stop aviation business that's kind of beginning to show signs of getting back to recovery is a big risk for us. So when we put this in our strategy, we've got 5 key strategic links that we want to go to. So being people-centric is very much part of our overall strategy that we want to try and address. So what do we do? What's the impact? If we don't do this, we'll fail to deliver our objectives, and we will actually make our customers unhappy. We are measured very much on-time performance. We're very much determined on how we deliver cargo. All of that depends on the staff that we can actually get. So it's a real challenge that we have to go. So what are we trying to do? What are we telling the world that we're trying to do at the moment? So the value proposition for staff is really important. Ground handling, unfortunately, has a bit of a bad reputation of being a margin business, and it's really cost driven. But actually, a lot of our cost is from staff turnover. Now, I'm going to show you the size of that problem in just a moment. So we have to really try and resonate with our employees and get a little bit more stickiness. I'll just give you an idea of that as well. Is in the US, our EVP for the Americas was saying in a call the other day is, if we can get staff to 18 months, they will stay with us for years. But we lose most of our staff in the first 3 months. So it's really that first impression about what they're getting into and how we attract them is really important. And how that connects to manpower planning is going to come in just a moment. We need to build on that talent, so we invest a lot of time in training. I think we spend about 36 hours for every employee per annum on training. That will be highly weighted to new joiners, of course, but we have recurrent training programs. But we also do some management training. We do some supervisory training as well to try and help people develop their career. And we know that we have to look at different markets for our staff. So I think the traditional way of getting staff isn't necessarily working. And I think with COVID, we've seen a lot of people have moved into different industries. A lot of people want to work in different ways. So we're going to have to widen our demographic, and we're going to have to come up with new ways of working, really to be successful at any kind of business, really, I would say. So all of this information straight out of our annual report, as are our KPIs. Now, these are KPIs we publish every year in our annual report, year on year. It's very transparent. It's kind of scary. But if you look at our employee turnover, if you look at pre-COVID, in 2019, when things were normal, we had staff turnover of 58% per annum. 58% per annum. So if you can imagine that, for some of our warehouses, it's a more normal, or any parts of our business, it's a more normal 8 to 10%, which is quite normal, and businesses quite like that level of turnover. In other areas of business, we can have staff turnover in excess of 100%. That's a massive risk to the business. It's a massive risk to continuity of the business that we actually go. So it's really important. We're very public about measuring this. Obviously, 2020 was a special year. Obviously, a lot of businesses had to downside. We were very lucky in a lot of parts of the world. We were able to retain our staff through government schemes, etc. But even last year, still in the same situation, we had still a fairly large staff turnover. So going forward, that's really something that we will continue to focus on as we go through. When we look at productivity, it's interesting, and it's probably one that when I was reflecting on making this presentation, I probably should push for in the annual report more next year, is we do put 2 KPIs for fueling and employee hours for ground services, so for operating the turnarounds and operating the check-in services for flights, on how many hours we actually take for each of those. We don't currently present our cargo KPI for this, and this is where we're beginning to turn into the manpower planning one. So for me, if I was actually putting a KPI on here that the markets would be interested in, and kind of reflects about how efficient we actually are as a business, I would look at moving into tons per full-time employee. So in the cargo world, if we go for the number of tons per full-time employee, that's a really good KPI for how efficient we are. And it's a good way to describe some of the things that will affect the productivity and how we calculate our manpower and how we get the resources in place. So typically for tons per FTE for us, I would say we are at the moment somewhere around 650 tons per FTE in cargo in Menzies. It does vary very significantly between warehouses, etc. And you'll see why when I look at how that's actually calculated and what can affect it. But when you're looking at that, that's kind of what you're driving as an efficiency in the business to go. So just moving on. So what is this cargo business that I talk about? The cargo business model. On the right-hand side is a little graphic that we use in our induction training to start off, to get people an idea of what's actually the business is actually about. So air freight is really used for time-sensitive, high-value, maybe not the largest commodities that are moved around the world, but it's getting them from A to B. So the part that's in the yellow box is the part that Menzies actually involved in. So we run warehouses at 50 plus locations around the world. We also load the cargo in getting close to 200 locations around the world as part of our ground services part. Outside of that, we obviously have the rest of the logistics part. So we're just part of the logistics network. And we've seen in the last year how important and how stressed that has actually been in our industry. So when we look at productivity for a full-time employee, there are a number of different factors that can affect it. So in the warehouses that we have, a lot of it can be down to how much mechanization do we have in that warehouse? Is it a very manual process? So are we getting people to lift boxes and move them manually? We don't have any of those these days, really. Is it just all loose cargo that's going to go into small airplanes that's going to move in there? Also, what's going to affect it is, what does our customer want? So if they want a faster or more express service or a more complex service, that will often take additional resource. So in the aviation world, we have a ground handling agreement, which we agree with our customers, that sets out a service level agreement. So the service level agreement might say for general cargo, I would expect that cargo to be exported latest time for a narrow body airplane might be 4 to 6 hours before the aircraft departs. It's when I can accept the cargo, make sure that it's secure, make sure that it's built correctly, and deliver it to the aircraft to be in time for that flight. On delivery at the other side for imports, maybe a similar kind of time, might be 4, 6, 8 hours that we actually agree. But for some products, maybe the customer wants faster. Maybe they want an express product. Maybe they've got a product which requires special handling, like pharmaceuticals or something like that. So they will all affect the amount of tons per FTE I'm going to produce, and they also affect how I plan for that very much. And what type of aircraft am I delivering to? So on a 737 doing a regional flight within Europe, there's probably not a lot of cargo demand. It's loose cargo, it's loaded by hand. I might be loading 300 kilos, 500 kilos of cargo by hand on the airplane. If I'm taking a full freighter out of Amsterdam and I'm going somewhere else, long haul, I might be in a 747. I might be doing 80 to 100 tons of cargo that I need to build. So again, that's going to very, very much affect my productivity. It's going to affect my manpower, and the flight schedule, etc., is going to make a big difference to when that's actually going to deliver. In the cargo world as well, sometime the forwarder will tender that cargo already in a container or already built on a pallet, which obviously makes it less work for us to do. They may just put it as boxes. We may have to screen it for x-raying. We may have to put it in front of dogs for screening as well. It may require special handling because it's valuables. It may need to go into a safe. There are all different things that can happen in there as well. When we look at our manpower and we look at our productivity as well, when the forwarders are going to come and either to deliver the cargo or to pick up the cargo is one of the big things that will also affect my efficiency. So forwarders don't necessarily turn up that 4 to 6 hours after the flight. They'll turn up when it suits their operational needs themselves, when it's cost effective for their trucks to come and pick up the cargo or deliver the cargo and move forward with that. So all of these things are in a very complex melting point of how do we decide how many men or women that we need in our operation to deliver cargo service. So it's a very complex model, and I've had very long discussions with the guys at WePlan about how we can set this up in a cargo environment. But it's a very interesting set of calculations. But once you understand the cargo model and you understand each of the process steps are involved, you can put a value in time and effort that's required to do each of these. And you can look at what you've promised your customers. You can look at how it differs in that warehouse, and that will give you what your requirement is for manpower. So that's kind of the traditional picture. We've done it for years and years and years like that, with varying degrees of accuracy and efficiency, and generally in a very, very manual way. So when we look at the process that we actually have, the spreadsheet on the right is probably the state of the art as we were standing up till now in how we calculate our manpower. So we have calculations and Excel spreadsheets where we know that to break down a pallet of pharmaceuticals, it will take 1 man 1 hour to take down 1 ton, for example. To build a flight for a freighter, we might expect to get 30 tons for this customer on this particular flight, and we can do the build up for that and the acceptance for that in this number of man hours. So traditional planning is a very, very manual, very bespoke process, and we don't revisit it very often. Something significantly has to happen in the business to make us revalidate the planning. So if the schedule significantly changes, if we get an extra customer, if there's seasonality because there's a particular product that needs to fly at a particular time, we may revisit the plan. And the key for a cargo warehouse is to look at that plan and see, can I maximize my utilization to get the most throughput I possibly can through the warehouse? So what's my peak day? What's my worst schedule? What do I do at that time? And can I find another customer that will fill a hole somewhere in the middle of that schedule that's going to make my business more profitable? So that's a traditional planning issue that we have. So to say, it's not very dynamic. It's quite intensive. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of finger in the air about what we actually do, how much time things take. But there is quite good tribal knowledge about doing it in this way. Is it fit for purpose? Well, I think what we've found through COVID, our world turned upside down. Everything changed. All of the traditional trade flows disappeared. In cargo, most of us would have talked about for years and years and years, getting a September through November annual peak. Basically, as shops got ready for Christmas, as businesses were closing their financial year, etc., a lot of things moved by air, and it was pretty predictable. Certain times of the year, you would have mango season in certain areas. Very predictable. Mother's Day, we ship so many flowers on Mother's Day. Very, very predictable. The world all suddenly changed with COVID because all of the flights that we were expecting all went away. So much of the cargo of the world goes in the belly and it's disappeared. So it's moved on into a different world where our planning of the past isn't quite flexible enough for the situation of the moment. So that became really challenging for us. Put on top of that, we had sickness rates, etc. So traditional planning has really, it's probably found its limits. And unfortunately, we're kind of hitting a situation now where we need to look forward. And fortunately, we were having discussions with our friends at WePlan, and we're beginning to think about what we can do about this. But there's another side to it as well. And going back to the people part. So the cycle length is different. There are outside factors that are actually changing. There are carriers that are no longer there. There are routes that are no longer being flown, but will be flown again soon. So patterns are changing all the time. Going back to that strategic requirement we had to look after our staff, our rosters are not necessarily that user-friendly. Sometimes they're done because they're easier to plan and maybe perhaps not so efficient. So one of the reasons we think that staff leave is staff don't necessarily want to work through the night because that's an easy roster plan for someone to work if there's not a lot to do and to keep them busy. They would rather find a job which is better, where they're occupied better. Perhaps they don't have to do so many on nights. So we need to really evaluate how many staff we have on different shifts, etc. We need to be more flexible and friendly about how we do that. For staff, they want that flexibility. I think we've all learned through COVID. We've all had a bit of a rebalancing of where we are. I'm speaking to you still, even though everything is opened up in Scotland from my office at home, because I find that more productive. I go to the office regularly. I travel regularly. But actually, I find working from home is very, very efficient. I think our staff are also looking for different things. They've realized that childcare and things like that weren't an issue when they were at home. So to compete with other industries, we need to have that flexibility. We need to also be predictable for our staff. We need them to know there is a pattern, what's going to happen. Staff will be looking for different things. Some individuals just perhaps want to be quite happy to volunteer, quite happy to do more hours in a day and work less days. Other staff might be looking for patterns where they're looking for a few hours every day, but they can't work at other times, etc. I think we need to change the way that we're looking at how we do this, and we have to put our shoes in the actual end user of our rosters, our staff, and look there as well. And it would be great if there was some element of control. Here am I sitting at home. I have an element of control about when I go into the office. And that's really important to me. And I value that very much. And I imagine the same would be for our operational staff if we can deliver it. Traditionally, we've not had that capability. Traditionally, it's been very hard. It's been very much a hierarchical thing. We employ you, we give you a roster, we expect you to turn up. Is that sustainable? I think it's a question. I don't know. I'd like to think that we can meet somewhere in the middle for that. And I think it will be very much driven by markets and what we can actually do and how far we can actually go. But at the moment, this is kind of my view on what is actually going on, where we're actually at, and why businesses perhaps need to look at how they plan, schedule, and engage with their staff in a different way going forward. And that is really my presentation at the moment. So I don't know, James, if you want to take questions at the moment or at the end for me.
Thank you very much, Alan. We'll take some questions at the end. We have had a couple of questions already dropping into the chat, so we'll come back to those. But thank you very, very much for setting the scene. Some very interesting insights there, not only into Menzies as a company, but also how you view resource planning, which obviously I can feel from you is a very important topic for the organization, and also the recognition of that things do need to become more dynamic. I think your company slogan is people, passion, pride since 1833. So and you said something in the beginning, very early on in the presentation, about it is all about the people, and ultimately it has to work for the people, and this whole traditional way of planning, as you said towards the end, of there's your roster, you just get on with it. Well, future thinking, we have to certainly become more dynamic, and that leads us now very, very nicely into our next presentation with Franziska, who's going to look more at the dynamic side of resource planning, and how that paradigm shift can potentially take place from that quite traditional manpower planning process, whether that's in Microsoft Excel and so on. And Franziska will talk about the WePlan vision of staff planning post-pandemic, something which Alan also talked about the differences pre-COVID. Obviously, we have the Ukraine crisis as well, which is making things volatile as well. So, Franziska, welcome to the virtual stage. Very looking forward to hear your comments through the presentation. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and also thanks to Alan for the interesting insights. I know that we have discussions now for a while on that topic, but it's always interesting to hear everything again, and how you are also trying to tackle this whole topic at the moment internally. So yes, as James, as you said, I will talk about the paradigm shift to dynamic staffing in cargo and ground handling. So that fits extremely well to what Alan was talking about. So yeah, as you explained in the beginning, we were working quite closely with Menzies beginning of the pandemic to roll out our solution for the cargo and ground handling industry. And I remember quite well the discussions and phone calls we had with Alan at the beginning, and we were already experiencing, and you were mentioning it many times, that the volatility in the industry has increased quite a lot, and that's obviously quite a big challenge for workforce planning. So now, 2 years later, if you look into the news, and here are just some articles I found, you can really feel that this is one of the most important topics for the industry. So the volatility is still extremely high. And if you listen to experts, and I think that's more important, is that this volatility will also last for the next month and years to come. So on top of that, we do also have, or we can also find a lot of articles on staff shortage in the industry. And besides the general difficulty to gain qualified staff in the industry, I think another important factor is that the volatility is making it much harder to predict how much staff you need. And Alan, you mentioned that. So what is the right number of people at the right time with the right qualification? So that's much more difficult nowadays than it was before. And that's obviously felt. I don't know how many ground and cargo handlers are joining today, but I think that's definitely something that you would feel, because it's much harder to also meet the service levels. But also on the passenger side, if you're not a ground and cargo handler, you will probably notice that, because you have long queues at the airports. So that's definitely also being felt. That's the current challenge. In preparation of this webinar, I actually found a very nice article from Denata, and also their management was claiming and mentioning again that this is really one of the biggest challenges at the moment. And one sentence that was stuck in my mind when I read this article was that they said, okay, the biggest challenge is that we can't have people waiting and just turning up on their shift and waiting until there's work to come. So we still need to be productive, but it's so hard today. So you would probably decide on a Friday afternoon that you ramp up your operation, and then something changes, and then you would have to ramp it down again on a Monday. So that's really tough. So James, you mentioned a few of the reasons why we still have that volatility in the industry. So there's still a continuous shutdown of destinations. So for example, China. Then there's still a need to handle cargo in the cabin flights because the passenger volumes are not yet stable. Then we have the Ukraine conflict that further added to geopolitical uncertainty. So those are definite factors. Then, Alan, you already mentioned the fluctuating volumes and the different goods that were shipped in the pandemic. And flowers probably just something you can still predict, but just thinking about toilet paper in Germany during the pandemic and that it was out of stock for several weeks, I think it's really hard to predict the consumer behavior, and especially after the pandemic. And I'm also interested to learn how that will change also in the midterm based on changed lifestyles and so on. And lastly, we have the volatility on the passenger side that is not helping with this whole volatility. So nobody really knows and can predict how the business travel is going to come back. So that's on the one side. On the other side, we do have additional challenges, which is the staff reduction due to the pandemic. And in the same article I just quoted from Denata, they reduced their staff, I think, from 45,000 to 34,000 employees, which is massive. And everybody, and that's felt throughout the whole industry, is really having issues and problems to attract employees back. And so I mean, one solution is obviously to offer higher salaries, and I think also Menzies, that's something that you did at some of the stations globally to gain back and get back the staff into the operation, but obviously also focusing on, or being faced with the cost pressure in the industry, it's hard. But I think that's just one thing that you can do. On the other hand, it's getting more and more important also to be an employer of choice. So that means that you offer flexible working contracts to your employees, that you invest into training, that you invest into developing the personal skills of your staff. So that becomes even more and more important. So looking at the traditional process and also the factors that from our perspective are really challenging nowadays, and why probably the traditional workforce planning approach does not really fit to what is happening today. So looking back 3 years ago, and how the whole process probably still works with many of the companies today, is that you would get a 3 to 4 months out, you would get a flight schedule and also tonnages. Then you would calculate your shift plans or lines. Then you would also, afterwards, you would publish the shifts or the shift lines. Once you have published the lines, then obviously there are still some movements because staff wants to swap the shifts, or also there are short-term absences coming in, and then there's a day of operation. And traditionally, we would have very rigid shift patterns, meaning that the staff would get a shift plan that is frozen 100 days before the day of operation. It would have very stable shift types in there. So you would, for example, have 3 day shifts, then 3 night shifts, and then 3 days off. So somehow a very stable pattern. And then afterwards, you would try to, as I said, swap the shifts with your team members. Many times that happens still via email, or even via personal communication with your team leader. And then when the day of operation starts, obviously there were disruptions before, but many times this was covered by overtime or also external staff that was brought into the shifts. And I think the challenges that we have when looking at this traditional planning approach is that nowadays you don't have like really a stable flight schedule anymore. So either you won't get a flight schedule, so that's also something that we see with our airline clients. They don't have a schedule, even like 3 to 4 months out. But I mean, if they have one, many times that flight schedule is not the same anymore during the day of operation. So a lot of changes happen, and that looking into the next challenge here is the other factor, because if you publish very stable and very traditional shift patterns, that means nowadays, because you have those weekly volatility and the weekly fluctuation of the flight schedule, that you would create a lot of idle costs and also understaffing. So not only overstaffing, but also understaffing, leading to SLA breakage or other additional costs in the operation. Then talking about the publication of the shifts. So as I said, many times we have very early freezing times and lead times where you have to publish the shifts to your staff. So every time you want to change something afterwards, so it's very costly, or you can't do it because you're bound to union agreements. Then moving on to the day of operation, I think one big factor is that today in the operation, also as a operational team leader, it's very hard to have transparency if you, for example, can grant additional day off to your team. So if someone approaches you and wants to get an additional day off on a Sunday, you really don't know if you can give it or not, just because you don't exactly know what the workload is going to be and if that's possible or not. And because you cannot do it, you would probably keep the people in the shift and won't change their schedule. And that in the end also leads to increased sickness. So that's another factor that we have seen in the industry in the last weeks or in the last month, that sickness has gone up quite a lot, just because for staff, they also have to manage their private logistics. And if they don't get additional days off when they need it because they have to take over childcare, they would just call in sick for that day. And lastly, the last challenge, I think, is that there's no real, no continuous analysis of the demand and also of the workload changes for the daily adjustments. So you can't really react to any adjustments of your shift plans on the day because you don't have transparency on what the actual workload is. So those are just some of the challenges. I mean, here you can see just some examples of our clients' shift patterns before the pandemic. So you can see that there's quite a pattern with the colors here, and they would all follow a certain planning approach. So many times As I said, it's very hard to consider weekly variations in the shifts. It's not possible to really adjust the supply on the day of operation. It's also, so that's just the side of the employer. Also from an employee perspective, it's difficult to include employee requests here and preferences just because you have those fixed patterns that are being rolled out for a long period of time. So that in the end leads to idle costs. As I said, we also have staff shortages on the day and also that risk of SLA fulfillment. And another factor is that we would also experience an imbalanced workload on the day. So if you have those fixed work patterns and the workload is very volatile and varies, I don't know, throughout the week, that means that some shifts would be highly occupied, there's a lot to do, and others would just be sitting in the warehouse and waiting until the shift is over. So that's also not good, and in the end that also leads to unhappy staff because of this, but also because you cannot really consider the requests. So from our perspective, and we know that this is the optimal vision, James, this is how you called it, and not all of the factors I think can be achieved at once, but that's at least our view on how the workforce planning and cargo and ground handling will change in the future. So we will move to that dynamic scheduling approach, meaning that we would have flexible shift start and end times. We would have varying weekly shifts. It will be more a rolling planning approach, and I will explain in a second what I mean with this. Everything will be based on a continuous feed of live schedules to recalculate the shift numbers, not only once or twice, but almost like weekly or daily to understand how the shift requirements and the workload has been changed. And then you can steer that and, for example, publish additional shifts to your staff that can be picked up. So as I said, so our view on this whole planning process of the future looks a little bit different than it was looking before. So we would more have a cycle here. Everything is based on the frequent push of flight schedules and production data to workforce planning, meaning that you can recalculate and the required shifts at any time. Obviously, one of the prerequisites for this is that we have interfaces to the existing systems of the cargo and ground handlers, meaning that, for example, we have access to cargo management system or to tracking tools, and that we are also able to read operational data from, for example, surveillance systems. And David is going to talk about that later as well. So there's a continuous recalculation, and that means that you don't have to publish the schedules and the shifts once, but there's a rolling publication of the shifts. You would publish individual shifts, and then you would rather work with optimizers to create efficient rosters instead of publishing a full shift line and shift pattern for a longer period of time. So it's rather a rolling process, and then if you publish the shifts to your staff, then you can still tailor and calibrate the workload. So for example, meaning that you could publish additional shifts to your staff and they can pick it up if this is required, or you can also grant additional absences if you see that the workload has gone down for a period of time. As Alan already mentioned, everything will be based on processes. So this is just an exemplary model of how this whole calculation works and the whole concept is based upon. So we would have the production data, and then the whole workload calculation is based on a very detailed level on processes and process times. So Alan mentioned already that workload really differs for the different types of goods or different types of aircraft that need to be loaded. So a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration. And then there would be a rolling forecast of the optimal number of shifts that you need on the day on the hour of the day. So besides the benefits, or like the major benefits I already mentioned, which is obviously an increased productivity on the day, we would have additional benefits here. So, and that's also something you were talking about, Ellen, and we would have a greater transparency on the cost per client and also the cost per product, making it possible to eliminate also non-profitable products or be stronger when it comes to client negotiations. And another factor is, and I think that's also very important, is that we would be able to achieve a higher satisfaction than we can feel today, because the staff will be able to request their shifts. It will be possible to do automated shift swaps in the future, and the roster stability in general is better compared to what we have today. So, that's my last point for today. So what are the requirements for implementation? So in general, it's the digitalization of the process, so end to end, and in particular, I'm talking about the interface between the forecasting solution and the duty planning solution. So as everything is very complex and is based on so many different factors and drivers that you need to take into consideration, obviously that's something that you don't want to do anymore in spreadsheets. So I think in particular, the automated creation of rosters and the consideration of all the different requests of your staff members, that's something that needs to be done with a proper optimizer. So that's one of the first prerequisites. Then the flexibilization of the planning process. So obviously today, all like the rigid shift patterns are normally a result of negotiations with your union. So if you want to change this is also a big factor in here, that you need to sit together and define a joint concept how this could work in the future. Then we have the transparency on process times, and that's something that David will talk about in the next presentation. So as the workload calculation is based on the actual process times, we obviously need transparency on the duration of the processes, and there are multiple sources that we can take this data from. So for example, surveillance systems or time tracking systems or time studies. And last but not least, it's the employee platform. So the whole swapping of shifts and requesting of duties and also pickup of overtime shifts also needs to happen in a digital system or digital world, because if you continue doing that in emails, or also because you have a very good contact to your team lead, that's not the way it should work in the future, at least from our perspective. So that's our input for today. And now I would like to, yes, James, there you are.
Thank you very much, Francie, for the presentation. Some very, very interesting insights, and also interesting to see that we are already at the stage where this awareness is there of what needs to take place, and the channels of change that organizations can do. Something which I like that you said. You talked about companies having the priority now to become the employer of choice. And this is something which many organizations of all sizes certainly have on their strategic table, let's say, as well as the usual ones of environmental sustainability and everything. We're always coming back to the people, and I think this is something that we need to be very, very clear about. It is always about the people, and the elements that you mentioned within the presentation, of course, are applicable for our topic today when we talk about air cargo and ground handling. But in reality, the principles are applicable within any industry where we would say where there is a requirement to plan people, then these processes and this investigation would need to take place. Excellent. So we're building the picture. Franziska, thank you again. We're building the picture here very nicely, and now we're going to, as we say, save the best until last, and hand over to David Preuss, who, as I mentioned before, is currently the Chief Information Officer for Cologne Bonn Airport, who's going to now bring us into the data and the virtual world to see how data can really, really support us, and how the change and the use of data within operations and planning can can certainly help organizations moving forward. So again, David, welcome to the webinar, and the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, James. I'll run straight away with my presentation, which is about how airport operations can be done better, probably with syndicated data, or why operational excellence comes from transparency and planning. So we have heard from both speakers before, Franziska and Ellen as well, that most of the things that we have known 3 years ago are probably a bit, changing these days. And I want to bring in a bit of a different perspective right now. I want to bring in the perspective of an airport, and especially the perspective of the person responsible for IT systems that try to figure out how do we handle all the challenges that we have. Now, let me go and move on. First of all, let's try to see what we have here. Where is that syndicated data thing? So we have heard about rostering already. So for rostering, for example, we would need not only the people's data. So who is it? It's David. He is I don't know, 50 years old, and so on and so on. He likes to work night shifts and so on. But we would also need other information like availabilities, like production tools, like is David able to, use this or that production tool, right? This or that pushback tug, for example. So all these different things have to come together. And in an airport, you probably can think of that there is many of these different data points that we would need to syndicate. Now, as you see from this little nice doggy, he's trying to find it. The main problem is that airports are actually silos, and silos in very, very different ways. It's not always with the negative connotation that we probably might have at the first glance, but silos in the way because we have had technical barriers, because we have had sometimes egocentric barriers, sometimes we have external and internal barriers because we need to exchange data, for example, with customs. We need to exchange data with, for example, subcontracted vendors like Menzies that handles on top of the airport or airport's platforms. So it's not always the negative touch, but we have silos. And the question is, wow, if we have these silos, how can we at the end move forward and syndicate this data? So for now, we have to say we have not found the big syndication engine, right? It's not like in these very nice movies that end up all well and everything is good. We have to search again. We have to look again what we at this point in time have. And especially during the pandemic, we have seen that the requests for more data, for more transparency became even more soaring because what was correct until then, it was not correct anymore. And we could not just rely on the spreadsheets that have been copied and pasted. And I can go back 45 years with spreadsheets that just have a different ending, like underscore 1996, underscore 2012, underscore 2019. But that did not work anymore in 2020. And we all know that. So we have to look again. What at the end is clear, as we have seen also from the previous presenters' very nice pictures, and process charts, it is at the end a constant stream of events. So something happens, and then on top of that, something else happens, or something happens and it influences how other things have to happen. So the logistics, the forwarder comes not at this specific time that we wish that he would come, but he comes when it fits his bill and not our bill. And based on these facts, we have to maneuver around, and we have to make decisions on how we best, to our knowledge, move through the process. So if we look what's on the menu today in 2022, we have 3 different choices: data queries, operational quiche, and soup of the day. And actually, for the data queries, we know we have many different data sources. We have touched on that. We have lots of different stakeholders that all have to play well together with all their different points of view in the overall process. We have many niche and legacy systems, very, very specific systems that cater only to one use case, but their data is very, very important in the overall process. So I have to have this data to move it along, to bring it to the next stakeholder, to let him know what's going to happen or what has happened. Apart from that, we have isolated data storages, and we have different ways on how to exchange data. Sometimes we have to exchange data with customs via email, sometimes it's spreadsheets, then the next time it's a super web service, and it's a funky Amazon thing, whatever it is. It's like a big zoo. You can find it anyway, anyhow in an airport. For operations, we have already heard all of these things that I already put in the quiche. It's soaring traffics. We have, even for some players in the market, peaks that have a higher spike than they had before in 2019, for example. We have even more process fragmentation because new requirements come in. We have to look into how long the process will take. If you think about a boarding process for 150 passengers, if, for example, or let's take 100 passengers. So if the process takes 60 seconds per passenger, this is quite some time that you would need, right? If you put 30 seconds on top because you have to check additional documentation for COVID certificates and whatnot, this is a major blast in your operations. And same goes with cargo. We have heard from Ellen as well as from Franziska already. It depends on what kind of cargo you have to put where. Yeah? Passenger freighters, we have heard about these things. They behave completely different from the ops crew's point of view. Then, or belly cargo is a complete different animal than some ULD just loaded whatever. Yeah, it's very clear. So with that, also finally, the extreme volatility blended everything together, made up for a perfect storm. And first question, how do we want to plan? How do we need to plan? How can we plan? And all that given that we have quite a significant shortage of workforce. We all heard that already. Now, and many things have changed in between already. We have gotten insights that we have had during the pandemic, as well as in already before with soaring traffic. And although many things have changed already, also especially from an IT perspective, how to move these data and how to bring data together, how to get rid of silos, and so on. Some really have not. And I think between these two pictures, I don't know, let me go back. Between these two pictures, I think this is a picture from the time when I was already born, definitely, but maybe 10, 12, 15 years old or so. Now, this is a very recent picture, but as you can see from the picture, in ground handling, not much has really changed. It still looks the same, and we still handle the same way what's going on the apron. So as I understood that, I felt a bit depressed. I don't know how about you, but I hope not, because at the end, there's hope as well. We have many different tools that we can use today that help us to be more flexible, that help us to integrate, that help us to overcome these silos, and that help us to exchange data in a format that everybody can understand what is expected from him and what we would need to do next. And that is also one of the proposals that Franziska made today. So here's an approach for a solution. First of all, govern your data. You have to understand what kind of data is flowing through the process, or through your operations, or through your whole end-to-end, whatever you want to call it, process. And this is not an IT thing. It's not something that somebody pulls it out somewhere and pushes it somewhere. From an IT perspective, the business logic has to be understood, and it has to be clear what kind of data is necessary and what not. What do we need, and what is probably interesting to know, but what is really not interesting to know? What is just ballast that we can throw away? Second, understand the whole process, not only the silo. If you know your silos, try to simplify and try to overcome these. Sometimes you cannot overcome because these are boundaries, barriers that are legitimate barriers, that are not there to be melted down, but think about how you can integrate at least. And finally, look at the chain of events. What influences what? If things happen, what else do they trigger? What kind of thing do they trigger? I'll give the example a minute later. And clean up your data. That's at least a very interesting and good one, because it's not a one shot action. You have to do it constantly, and you have to revise constantly what is necessary and what not, because things like the pandemic showed us, you have to have an understanding how your processes change and what is next that you need. For planning and resources, automate and integrate. We heard that from Franziska as well. We need to automate and integrate, because the amount of data that we need to look into also into patterns that we can deduct from history is quite a big bucket full of data. So you have to automate and integrate. It's nothing that you can do like in the manner that we have done. Yeah, it's me, David, and I've done it for 30 years and I know exactly what's going on. That's not the case. Kill the process fragmentation, try to move things together, and nevertheless, try to keep it simple. Don't overdo it. Two open points here. One is, do I really get ground truth? For most of the processes, we have quite an understanding where things come from. The one and only thing that we have not really figured out perfectly is exactly this one. And the second question is, can I rely on the data? Is it really the data? First bag in, first bag out. Is that data manual data? And why the heck do we have always the same timestamp for so many events? Crazy, because probably the people push the button very late. First bag out, last bag out, for example. If I push the button 2 times in a row because I just unload first and then push the buttons, I have the same timestamp where 30 seconds are in between, not even a second probably. Now, the point, as I said, is you have to really get the important data from the ground ops. So what is really going on during the whole turnaround process? And that is not only for passenger, but also for cargo crew. In Cologne, Bonn, we have the three major integrators basically on our campus, and to know exactly what equipment is where, what's exactly going on at what position is really a gold nugget. You have to really get that information. Fortunately, we have cameras all the way, and with new technologies like artificial intelligence, for example, we can definitely deduct many of the timestamps that are of real importance to us automatically with the camera stream and artificial intelligence. So if you get that and get that syndicated, you have transparency that you can use for planning, especially when you collect also the historic data from these turns, because then you can probably answer questions. Is a very specific constellation of flights, ground handling situations, nighttime, daytime, operational scheduling, for example, specifics, resource groups, crews that work together, are they better with these and that conditions? This is what you can find out then. So federate and make use of this syndicated flow of data at the end, and try to bring it all together, and especially look into patterns that you can see from history. Now, if I look too far back from the pandemic, then probably I will not be able to deduct too much because I have too many outliers. But if I look 2 years back, 3 years back, 2.5 years back, I will already be able to see how the patterns have changed. So to conclude, have a strong data governance and maintain quality in your data. This is a very, very, almost a no-brainer and very important one. And finally, one thing, without data, you're just another dude with an opinion. If you don't have the ground truth and if you don't have the data, what's going on, you just have an opinion on what's going on. And you can debate about it, you can have lengthy discussions about it, but it will not help you to move forward and be more efficient in your operations. Finally, integrate, but don't overdo it, because too much integration is like being in the Vodafone hotline trying to figure out what to do next with your additional contract, and nobody can tell you what's really going on. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Very, very interesting presentation. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your slides. I thought they were very, very interesting, and some great wording in there, and also some great pictures. I think starting with the dog, that was also nice. Some really good points coming out of your presentation. You know, you talked about transparency is key, how airports are silos. I fully agree with this. And something really interesting you said about a constant stream of events. And I think this is something that we underestimate, actually. We know in the industry that whenever we're in an operational environment, things will happen, and it's often a consequence of events that are building on top, whether it's late delivery from the forwarder, as you mentioned, whether it's weather, whether it's staffing, whether it's carrier schedules, and everything. So govern your data, understand it on a process level. I think this is really important. Reliability on the data, I would say, from an air cargo perspective, is definitely clear. You know, customers of ground handlers like Alan's require that transparency and visibility on data, which is linked directly to the milestone of the industry standard at all different stages through. And that's how, as a ground handler, of course, they're measured on their performance in line with the service level agreements of their customers. So this is really, really critical. So the timestamp is really a must. And I loved the statement on the final slide. Without data, you're just a dude with an opinion, which I think is really apt. So thank you very, very much for the presentation. Some really interesting points coming out of it. And now we're going to move into our Q&A part. So for everybody who's with us, please feel free to continue to write your questions into the chat. As I said in the beginning, let's make them as difficult as possible and put the speakers on the spot. I think it's always more interesting in that case. Thank you to those of you who have already added some questions. We do have a couple to start us off. So if I may, I'd come back to you, Alan. If I could start off with a question here. Which initiatives have you taken to reduce the overall number of staff needed? You're on mute, Alan.
Sorry, I'm
Okay.
now on mute. There we go. To me, it's not always about reducing staff. Obviously, it's getting hard to get staff, so we are looking at some initiatives. But in some ways, it's better to utilize them and have them in work at the right moment in time is probably where we really need to focus. So I've been working with a particular warehouse in North America recently, and we've been doing that. We've been very much looking at the peaks and troughs of the day and where we bring the staff in to make sure that the service is correct. So a lot of that, it's not so much for that. In some ways, it's for us is to get the right amount of staff to get the maximum amount of throughput that the market requires is what we're really about in some ways. Having said that, there are some things that we do that we're beginning to look at to say, this is something that perhaps we should be doing all the time, but when we're really busy or we don't have enough staff, we drop the ball with. So we had a recent innovation day, and we've been working with a startup company, or they've got some big customers already in the UK looking at robotics. So we're beginning to look at, can we use robots for certain functions in our warehouses that are possible for a robot to take over. So we're working very much looking at one that's looking to see how much space have we got left in our warehouse. Is everything in the space where we think it is in our cargo warehouse system? So we can do an independent check. And we actually have a regulatory requirement from customs to make sure we do those inventory checks. We are supposed to do those, depending on the agreement with customs, let's say every week. Things get lost, things get misplaced, particularly when warehouses are over full. So if you can do them more regularly, you'll find things. So we're looking at the robot to do that in the middle of the night when there's nobody there, and it can, or where there's very little activity going on. And that can save time for staff in a job that they're probably not enjoying doing, that a robot will do very, very accurately. So we're beginning to look at some areas like that. We have a new warehouse in China. Unfortunately, it's in that part of China which has had a lot of problems with shutdowns at the moment. But we're using a lot of robots as well to begin moving cargo around within the warehouses too. So we are beginning to look at some of those things, but they only make sense in certain locations. They don't make sense everywhere you are. So you know, we're not really on a mission to get rid of people. In some ways, we're short of people is sometimes making us think about how we use the ones we've got better. I think so. I'd answer that one. Okay,
that's interesting, and I agree with you. You know, when we talk about infrastructure and locations, we would say that, you know, no two warehouses are the same. No. You know, no two customers are the same. There's so many variables at play there. So I think there is definitely opportunity for certain, you know, automation and robotics, but we should always remember in the main that we're dealing with people. So what we're planning and preparing for them is, you know, to execute. We need to make it as visible or as transparent and as easy as we can.
And a lot of it, James, is just to hammer home that point. A lot of it isn't robotics and things. A lot of it is mechanization, which has been around for a long time. So, you know, it's just a matter of getting to that scale in an operation to say, you know what, it's time to have a mechanical solution for this rather than having people do it. So, you know, those things have been around for a long time.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Perhaps just another one for you, Alan, before we move on. Within your network, does each station plan itself and use the same spreadsheet and or logic? How do you manage it? Is that on a case-by-case basis per station, or do you have a global solution?
I'm going to take something from David's presentation in some way and kind of say, I wish. I wish we were that consistent in what we do. My role is to try and spread some of that good practice. So I try and find good practice and spread it around. But it's quite often a revelation when I do get involved in an operation is how long it's been since they've looked at what they're actually doing and how fixed in their ways they are. And also, to be fair, some of the local market forces, which even though I've spent a lot of time in Asia and I've traveled the world and I live in the UK now, I've been exposed to a lot of things, but sometimes I'm just quite surprised by certain work practices, which when you go and visit a site, you suddenly go, I didn't understand that, but I can see why they are doing it in that particular way. So it will not transfer across. So for example, in the US, we would have challenges sometimes in moving to a rolling shift pattern because people like to have a predictable shift pattern because they might have another job, because they may need more than one job to get by in some of the environments. So sometimes factors are out there that are actually a bit of a challenge to do it. But we'd like to, and again, I think that's any solution needs to be tailorable for that, because I think some of the rules won't necessarily apply. You can't necessarily take European work practices and ethics and try and apply them into another market. They won't necessarily work. But I think basic human needs and understanding what people want is probably an important part of any design of any solution that you come up with. So you need a solution that can meet that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Alan, you could also mix it, right? I mean, you could say, okay, there's a certain part of the workforce that really wants those fixed patterns because they have a second job, or I don't know, they prefer to have a very stable roster. And then you can have others that are more flexible. They get a different pay or something, but you can start mixing it, right, to meet both requirements in the end.
Yeah, that's a discussion we've had, Francie, in many ways, but very much I think is, again, we need to look at different ways of doing things and understanding what going back to what our, one of our mitigations for our risk in that is we need to find different employee bases, which means we need to understand their needs and their wants to want to be in the workforce. So I think that's part of it.
Interesting. Thank you for the insights there, Alan. So I'll open it out now to everybody. Perhaps David or Francie could kick us off with this one. Does workforce planning create jobs, or is it outcome-based, identifying overstaff, understaff, and the optimization of existing staff? Who would like to take that one?
David, do you want to go first? That's a difficult
I go first because my answer will not be biased, probably. No, it's unbiased anyway. But actually, I think yes. I think it has the potential to really create jobs, because it's not about squeezing in more with less people, probably, right? But if I have the transparency and if I have the understanding of what is possible and how to spread this possible factors which I have to deal with, right? The cargo, the people, their skills, and so on. If I have the transparency and if I can plan better, probably I can fit in even, I don't know, 2 turnarounds per stand more per shift, right? But that means I definitely don't have the kappa to do that. That means I need more people, right? I mean, in Cologne, I can definitely say they bombard us with cargo. We try to figure out how can we stuff that all in, right? And that is definitely the case. I think it is possible that we create jobs with that. It's not about squeezing in more. We are at the end of squeezing.
I guess for me, and kind of going along with David, is I think the roles that would be created create value. So I think that's the important, is that the power of having somebody looking at that and getting your workforce in the right place at the right time and optimizing it will more than pay for itself. And again, with the right tools, they might be for a company like Menzies, they might be able to do that for multiple locations. So it's just being able to manage it in a different way. So it's not necessarily about just creating a job, because that will be the difficulty in selling it internally in any business case, because you need to demonstrate the value it's going to bring. And I think that's the real challenge is how do we get that value creation? And it's a chicken and egg problem, because until you have the person, it's hard to demonstrate the results. You know, you have a strong gut feeling, but how do you demonstrate those results? And I think they're there.
Yeah, true. Yes, I mean, from a system perspective, obviously you want to achieve the goal of optimizing everything. So, I mean, if that wouldn't be our goal in the end, and from a system perspective, that's probably a useless system. But I mean, what we have experienced with clients is that many times also it can create new jobs, because we also find out that for specific times of the day you need more people, and it's much more expensive to spend overtime and also use external staff, for example. So it can be in both directions. And another factor to that, Alan, is something that you mentioned. It can also drive innovation from a workforce perspective, right? So moving away from probably stupid tasks in the warehouse and automating those tasks, but adding more intelligence and making the workplace also more attractive from an employee perspective. So if you know about those things, and if you know about inefficiencies, then you can make it better for both sides. Yes, that's my answer to that difficult question.
Very good. Thank you for those inputs. The next question is coming from somebody I know quite well. It's nice to see Shiju Matthew here from Globe Ground India in Bangalore joining us this afternoon. And he has a question which is more airport related. What measures can be taken by the airport to ensure the companies in the aviation landscape do not poach on each other's staff? What do you think to that one, David?
Throw money at them? I don't know. I mean, we are especially now. I'm jokes aside, but we have heard so many things about already staff and shortage of workforce, and it is really, really, really fierce. And with fierce, I mean it's really fierce. I mean, if you are willing to pay an upfront bonus, if you are willing to, give incentives to people that bring in new stuff that is far above any imagination, then you're welcome in the new market. I don't know. I have no idea. But one thing that really has been said already is give them the environment they need to also be able to handle their own lives, right? It's not only about the money. It's not only the Maslow pyramid's lower boundaries, right? I mean, yes, for sure. I don't want to put a table soccer and a small basket for the dog on the apron, which Google can do, but definitely we have to look at how do we deal with the requirements of the people, right? Because their living has changed dramatically as well. And if we can cater to that, and if we can give them also room to develop and not only be the loader, then I think we also have a good chance to play a role without just throwing more money at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I think as you said, there's so many different variables at play. It definitely just isn't about the money. It's about the whole employee experience. I mean, we're seeing currently live across the industry at the moment, at several airports, chaos with security at the moment. I mean, Amsterdam has been well documented in the news in recent days of, queues of people outside because there are no staff available to process the people inside the terminal. Just before we started the webinar today, IATA released an official statement concerning the reforms needed to attract and retain ground handling talent. And this was a statement which was given by Nick Kareen, who's the IATA Senior Vice President for Operations, Safety and Security. And when you read through, they talk about retention programs and they talk about the implementation of standardized operational processes. So you're giving the people a direction, you're giving them the right training, you're giving them the right foundation of how to work. Training passports that mutually recognize skills and training across ground handlers, airlines, and/or airports. So you have that, that similarity of training and the adoption of new technologies and automated processes. So that's a statement which came from IATA today. Alan, any thoughts to add on that one?
To me, I kind of come more with the IATA perspective. Is it's inevitable that we would lose staff between different businesses within the airport. I'm more concerned about losing the staff to other industries and not being attractive to other industries. So that's our problem. The technology deficit. If you came into some of our businesses, the generation that's coming into the workforce now, look at some of the technology and think, what are we talking about? So bits of paper, clipboards running around. My son's just become a dispatcher recently. He's doing that at the moment. And, he wants to work on the airline that has the iPad app. He doesn't want to work on the one which has the bits of paper and the radio calls. And that's what we need to make it attractive to do that. So to me, I think our biggest risk is losing it to other industries, and we've certainly seen that in air cargo. The e-commerce has taken a lot of people from our business because we train them well. We've got standards because it's a high risk business that we actually work in, and they're immediately transferable into their warehouses. So they're an easy bet to hire from us. So we need to compete, and it is more than just money. It is partly money, but it is also other things as well. It's some of the other parts that we need to deal with.
Yeah, indeed, I concur with you. Thank you for that. So moving on to the next question, just looking through the chat here. This is perhaps a question open to all of you. What are the greatest challenges when transitioning workforce planning to become more data integrated, and how do you solve them? Perhaps Franziska or David, would you like to share a few thoughts on that one?
Yes, I mean, I really like David's example that he mentioned in his presentation. So having a good data quality, I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we have also seen many times, because, I mean, you start from a client, you get a lot of data, and then you start to put everything together and calculate the workload, and then you end up with a workload that is probably twice as high as the current like staff population, or it's like half of it, and then you deep dive into the data to find out what is wrong, and then you find these weird entries, exactly as you said, like 30 seconds for doing the whole handling process and stuff like that. So I think it's really a challenge. And on top of that, I mean, if you want to clean it, it's, I mean, you can do that. But as you said, it's a recurring exercise. And if you don't change the behavior of the staff, that won't change in the future. And I think that's the second biggest challenge, because getting also the understanding from a staff perspective and also from a union perspective, why you need that data and why it's so important that it's correct and that you need it to also make their life better. I think that's the second biggest challenge from my side. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I second that definitely. I think the aspect that Yashu brought in here, from long term to day of ops, is another important factor, because the data that we would need based on the timing in the process differs. Right? There's some master data that is necessary all the time, but there's also data that is only relevant at the beginning, but there's also data that is relevant, for example, a day of ops, or even during ops, or just before, like production tools, right? Out of a sudden, the aircraft has changed, right? And the production tools that were scheduled to be on that, I don't know, on that gate are not there. I even have to look at it. And these things are very important, I think. Now, coming to the question, is there the silver bullet killing system that puts everything together and that can just do it? Frankly speaking, almost 25 years somewhere as a CIO. If somebody comes in my office and says, I have the silver bullet, I have a quite good laugh, and then I tell him what I think about it, and we can have a beer. You have to figure out for yourself what kind of issue you want to solve where, and how much is integration necessary or not, how much integration is healthy or not. We have heard the same connotation with the Excel, with the spreadsheet that is in every single location. This is not really working out because you have so many different factors that govern how you should solve that problem. So is there one silver bullet answer? No, there's not, but there are definitely a few strong players in the market. One we have sitting here with Franziska, but there are also others like Inform, these guys like Asaya for ground truth. Yes, there are a couple of good ones, and everybody picks what he needs, I guess.
Yeah, sure. No, you're right. There are definite competitors out there. I think something that we recognised, a couple of years ago, that perhaps the devil in the detail, I would say, on the cargo side from a planning perspective was really not visible. It was more focused on the airline crew, from flight deck to cabin to ground handling staff. This is where the focus really is from those leading systems who have very, very good software, but from a cargo perspective, and this is why we then teamed up with Menzies to do that study. And from a cargo point of view, our processes are quite long. They're quite, they can be quite tricky. And I think that's, that real digging into the detail of, on a process and on a shift level is really, is really valuable. And I think that's, we've certainly seen progress there.
Especially, I think. Sorry, Alan, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that's very much there. And Menzies has done this before. We have looked at these systems as well. And to be fair, the low-cost carriers have taught us very, very well. And the precision timing schedules of carriers, it's been around for a long time. So in the ground handling world, we really have it down to that 25-minute turnaround. It is orchestrated and it's very, very well understood. Unfortunately, the cargo business, people will bring along odd-shaped boxes at weird times, and sometimes they won't turn up, and so it's not as predictable and complex for us. So I think the key thing for us, and we spent a lot of time with WePlan looking at this, is the flexibility of the solution, that we could look at the industry standard processes and look to see how they could be adapted in different markets. I think our big challenge, and where all these things fail, and there is no silver bullet, if you don't go in with a valid business problem and you don't do the change management process with it, you're doomed to fail. So it's not an IT solution, it's a business problem that needs fixed, and then there's a technical solution that can help you if you're willing to put the time and the effort in to do so. And I think that's the real challenge. And then your big issue is, because IT solutions have got a bad name, because they have been sold as silver bullets before, is overcoming internal skepticism about making them work. So I think that's the real challenge. So it really needs a lot of sponsorship. It needs a lot of effort, and you need to find something and demonstrate success rather than trying to change the world overnight.
Yeah.
Ellen, I love you. Can I call you later?
We like this, some webinar bonding. Excellent. Thank you for your thoughts. Francie, anything to add before we move on to the next question?
No, but I would have a question for David. I'm sorry that I'm now destroying here the whole structure of it, but using video analytics. So I think also, it's on the picture that you showed, you could see the different events happening on the screen. So how do you make sure that you also understand more about the reasons why things happen? Because you just mentioned, if, for example, the equipment changes, that would impact the vehicles that need to be brought to the position of the aircraft. So how do you make sure that you can really connect all the different dependencies there?
Yes. First of all, I think the number of events is important. So first of all, what do I want to capture, right? Because there is definitely stuff that is important for us, especially in our process, because we have heard already sometimes processes just differ, and as well as it's absolutely nonsense if I buy a big truck if I only want to, every evening pick up 6 bottles of beer at the supermarket. The same way I have to look at these events. What kind of events are really, really important to me? And once I have looked at these events, I can start to collect historic data. So I can later on look and see, does it have a pattern? Right, and if I figure out that there is a pattern, for example, we have talked about volatility, right? Airlines scheduled 6 weeks before actual flight date, they schedule like crazy here and this and this and that, and then it goes down, it goes down, it goes down, and then actually 2 days to ops, out of a sudden we have 40% less capacity. Than they, for example, registered. Now, obviously, you can think of, okay, probably this is only a one shot, but if you see a pattern there, you can definitely discuss different with your stakeholders as well and say, hey, we have not observed it once, twice, 3 times, and it's not a feeling. Here you can see exactly what happens. The same goes for connecting the dots, right? If I look at multiple turnarounds, if I look at many turnarounds, if I can compare different groups of turnarounds by different criteria, that's what's called feature engineering, then I can have an understanding and an idea about what's going really wrong here, right? Because there are many stakeholders that are involved, from different ground handlers, probably for, let me give a very viable example. Shared equipment on the apron. I love it. Where is that? Where is that thing? I don't know. It was just there when we set up everything. It was just there. Now it's gone. Who has it? We don't know. Why? Yeah, because we don't know, right? So, and with video, that's very interesting. You can see it right away. It was there and it was picked up by the tug of competitor A or whatever, right? So this gives you clear advice on what to do and how to fix the process.
Yeah, at least they were not told to.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, some very very interesting thoughts there. So we're going to move now into our final question before we do a wrap up of today's session. And I think this is a question that brings us back to the point of, we are always dealing with people, and it's people that are at the end product of what we're doing when we're talking about planning. From a business point of view, and there are a lot of countries and companies in the world that are heavily unionized. And this obviously has quite an impact from a planning perspective. So I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on this question. How do you tackle unions or staff that is not willing to take part in the journey of digitalization?
I think James is. I wouldn't use the word tackle. I think it's probably the wrong. That starts off in the wrong position altogether. I think it's engage. Really, in some ways, if you can find a way of engaging the union in the process. Of course, they will have an agenda and they are out to look after what are their members. The same people that we're talking about are their members, so that they want to have the dues from their members and they want to represent them well. But again, if they are thinking about their members, and if you can explain what you're trying to do, and if you can protect what staff want, if you can ease them into this gently, I think there's some opportunity to do so. That may not work in every place. It really depends on what the position of that union is. But if you've got a union which is open-minded, we can actually get the staff a better working environment, and I think that's a really good thing. We want to attract people. We want to have them. They want us to be able to do that so that they can have members. So I think they're all important things to try and get on maybe not in the same side of the table, but close to the same side of the table. We're after something, they're after something. We understand that, but in the end, if we can make the people happy from both sides, maybe we can make it work, and we'll have a good outcome. That's easy talk. That's not easy to do, and certainly, my thinking on that, sometimes it's better not to come at that directly as the company. Maybe you need some help. Maybe you need someone to come in and say, hey, here's a software solution that we're bringing in because the company wants to achieve these things. We think we can do these things for you too. Would your staff be interested in it? Maybe a better way to engage, because I think otherwise it becomes a management union issue. But if you have a third party in there, somebody in the middle, you may find that common ground that everybody wants.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. David?
From my perspective, I'm just an IT dude, so I'm not a management dude. But nevertheless, I think always be a teacher. Yeah, so you always have to be ready to explain it from different viewpoints, in different angles, over and over and over and over again. And although this might be very tiring from time to time, you have to be ready to do that, because at the end, probably people will understand even better. And if it's not this time that they say yes to your proposal, probably next time they will say yes. This is one thing. The other thing is that I think is important, is sharing values. And sharing values also means if I, for example, can be more efficient and make more money with less cost, I should share some of the wealth also with the people who created that. Yeah, because sometimes you get the feeling that shareholder value is a system that is created by people that never share a value. So you have to share with the people that really create that, and make this clear. And probably then you have an issue. As Alan said, sometimes there's no way out at all. If the situation is so already contradictory that you cannot find a way out, then it's really hard. And sometimes you have these situations, and then even tackle is the wrong wording already at the beginning. Or war room or stuff like that. Yeah, let's fight them down. Oh wow, okay, then we are then we are doomed already at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you though, what you said about, you have to be repetitive, or we would perhaps say consistent in the approach, and it is, I think, tiring, and you sometimes you feel as though you're not making any headway, but you really have to, I think, have a strong and consistent message, and delivering what you can really do for the people and how you can enhance it, for the people is really important. Franziska, any final thoughts on that one?
Yes, sure. So I think the first point is the nice wording of having a give and take there, because many times what we want to ensure is that we engage at very early stages with the union, so that they are not confronted with a fully defined concept and they just have to say yes or no. So that we work on a concept together, that we find out what they also want and what is important for them. So as an example, it's not ground and cargo handling, but we were working with an airline to increase the efficiency in the rosters. And in the end, we identified, like a saving of 2 days per employee per month. And we agreed on sharing those 2 days. So 1 day for the employees to get more free time in a month. And the other day was for the company in the end. So that's one point. Then another factor is data. And that was mentioned by David before. So if you have data, it's you're not the stupid guy with the opinion, but you can really argue. And especially when it comes to distribution of work, I think that's always also very insightful for the union to understand what is going on in the workforce and how uneven work is sometimes distributed. So that's the second thing. And lastly, I also really appreciate quite a lot to talk to the staff, because that makes the position in the conversation with the union so much easier because you really understand what is going on. So I just have a rail project also where we talk to the clients and also to the employees on board of the train to understand how the process is in the end happening. And that makes the position so much easier when you talk to the union now, because you can really say, okay, I've seen the process, I know what they are doing, and I know why this would be helpful for them also to change. Yeah.
If I may add one quick remark on that,
Sure.
Very interesting, Franziska. I think what is very often underestimated when it comes to resource planning, that this is a two-sided sword, if I may say so. Because if I talk with people that get resource planning, now, the discussions very much evolve around, now they want to plan every second of us and squeeze more in. And I tell them very often, hey, have you ever looked at it from the opposite side, that you probably can also tell them, hey, we are understuffed. There's too much work. If you cannot fit it. And this is a perspective that is very often not seen by staff, but they can use it as well and can also make their arguments clear and say it will not work out if we go from turnaround to turnaround with only 3.5 minutes in between. You have to reconsider your approach, right? So that's also, I think, an interesting facet of that whole discussion. Sorry.
No. Really, really valuable points, David. Thank you for sharing that. And I would concur with you. I'm staggered at how this 2 hours has flown by, and unfortunately we are coming to the end. I would love to continue. It's been an absolute honor to moderate 3 distinct experts from the industry, and I think we've really seen the whole spectrum here of experience, from Alan setting the scene with his global aviation cargo experience and identifying the pain points, the real core pain points of what it is from a cargo handling perspective, to Franziska, who then talked about the transition towards dynamic planning from traditional planning, about organizations being the employer of choice, and it really is about the focus on the employee. And then obviously then finishing with David with his significant airport and data experience, and how that can also help us to plan more effectively in the future. So I think we're leaving our participants of the webinar with some very, very interesting thoughts. I'd personally like to thank all 3 of you today for your contributions. It's been really, really interesting from my perspective, and I'm sure it has as well from our audience.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Just a couple of logistics topics to go before we do close. So thank you very much to everybody who's attended today. We really, really appreciate your attendance. If you've enjoyed it that much and you'd like to watch it again, then you will be able to as of tomorrow, because the webinar has been recorded and will be posted via the various social media channels as of tomorrow. So if you'd like to listen to the 4 of us again, then please feel free to do that. And at the same time, if you'd like to contact any of us to discuss any of the elements that have been presented and discussed today, then please feel free to reach out to us via the LinkedIn channel or any other channel which you wish via our websites. We'd be happy to hear from you, and also to engage further. So with that, I will close the session for today. Thank you again to the great panel. Thank you to the audience, and please take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye.